These are the cities that were supposed to transform America, magnificent metropolises drawn on paper, sold to thousands of eager investors, and in many cases never built at all. This is the story of how land speculation, bribery, and outright fraud shaped America's first master-planned cities, and why the echoes of those schemes still haunt us today. Before Wall Street existed, before railroad stocks or tech bubbles, there was dirt. Land became America's first great speculative asset. The favorite object of speculation in America before big business was public land. Investors could buy it cheaply in enormous quantities, sit on it, and wait for rising prices to deliver profits. And it worked spectacularly because Americans carried with them memories of the old world, where owning broad acres meant wealth and social prestige. That memory produced what historians have called an insatiable lust for land. Harvard economist Edward Glaeser put it simply, America has always been a nation of real estate speculators. Their basic business model was to acquire land from a public entity at low cost and gradually sell it to smaller investors. That sounds like normal commerce, but when you strip away the genteel language, what you find underneath is one of the most ambitious fraud machines in American history. Let's start with the granddaddy of them all, the Yazoo Land Fraud. On January 7, 1795, Georgia Governor George Matthews signed the Yazoo Act into law. With one stroke of a pen, he transferred 35 million acres of land in present-day Alabama and Mississippi to 4 private companies. The price? $500,000. Do the math, and each acre sold for roughly a penny and a half. 35 million acres of frontier territory handed over to political insiders for the cost of a modest estate. How did this happen? Bribery. Pure, brazen, wholesale bribery. According to historian Thomas P. Abernathy, several companies of speculators had shamefully bribed all but 2 members of the Georgia legislature. Senator James Gunn, Georgia's Federalist U.S. Senator and the ringleader of the so-called Yazooists, personally arranged the distribution of money and land to cooperative legislators. Senator James Jackson saw it for what it was. He denounced the Yazoo Bill as a confiscation act of the rights of your children and mine and unborn generations to supply the rapacious graspings of a few sharks. Jackson was so outraged that he resigned his seat in the U.S. Senate and returned to Georgia to fight the scandal head-on. Within a year, a new governor named Jared Irwin signed the rescinding act, nullifying the corrupt sale. And in a moment of theatrical fury, Georgia burned every copy of the Yazoo Act except one that had already been sent to President George Washington. But the damage was done. The contracts had been signed. Investors had paid money. And in 1810, the Supreme Court weighed in with Fletcher versus Peck, ruling that the original contracts were binding, and the state could not retroactively invalidate them. It was the first time the Supreme Court struck down a state law. Congress eventually settled the matter in 1814 by awarding $5 million to the claimants, paid from proceeds of the very land that had been stolen in the first place. Now, if you think that scandal was an isolated case of frontier corruption, let me take you to the banks of the Mississippi River, to a place called Cairo, Illinois. In 1817, a Baltimore speculator named John G. Comegys purchased roughly 1,800 acres at the southern tip of Illinois, right where the Ohio and Mississippi rivers converge. He named it Cairo, after the Egyptian city on the Nile. It was going to be the commercial capital of the American interior. Promoters surveyed an elaborate plat featuring over 4,000 lots spread across 7 miles of planned streets. The vision was grand. The reality was a swamp. Comegys died in 1820, and his plan died with him, but Cairo refused to stay dead. In 1837, a man named Darius B. Holbrook revived the scheme, incorporating the Cairo City and Canal Company and amassing over 9,700 acres. He raised enormous sums of capital, including a $500,000 loan from the New York Life Insurance and Trust Company. And here's where it gets truly audacious. Holbrook marketed bonds in London with lavish illustrations of a burgeoning metropolis, a city of banks, churches, factories, and wharves poised to dominate commerce at the continent's river crossroads. Investors across the Atlantic poured money into this fantasy. By 1840, the London bondholders had gone bankrupt. The Cairo Bank collapsed shortly after. The grand city was nothing more than a few miserable structures in a malarial swamp. Then Charles Dickens showed up. In April of 1842, the most famous writer in the English-speaking world passed through Cairo and described it as a detestable morass and a breeding place of fever, ague, and death. He wrote that he was given to understand that this was a very smart scheme by which a deal of money had been made, and which led to many people's ruin. Dickens was so appalled that he immortalized Cairo in his novel Martin Chuzzlewit, renaming it Eden, a miserable collection of broken-down cabins in a swamp where a gullible young man spends his last funds on a home he's never seen, seduced by a large, elaborate map of a city hanging on the wall. Cairo limped along for decades, but never became what its promoters promised. Today, the city has roughly 1,500 residents. Most of the town has been abandoned. And Cairo wasn't unique. Between 1854 and 1857, a land speculation frenzy swept through Minnesota territory. An estimated 700 town sites were platted during those 3 years. 700. Most of them were what historians call paper towns, communities that existed as names and lines on a map, but were never populated, never developed, never anything more than a mechanism for separating investors from their money. Many speculators sold town lots to unsuspecting newcomers that weren't, and never would be, developed. Sometimes they didn't even own the land they were selling, handing people false deeds in exchange for real money. This was the golden age of the confidence man. The term itself was likely coined in this era. As author Amy Reading noted, modes of communication weren't so swift, so it was easier for itinerant swindlers to move from town to town, practicing the same small cons within a given region without getting caught. But not all planned city frauds looked like empty swamps. Some looked like paradise. Consider Pullman, Illinois. In 1880, railroad magnate George Pullman began building a model industrial town on 4,300 acres south of Chicago. He spent $800,000 on the land alone. The town featured paved streets, running water, sanitary facilities, parks, and beautiful architecture designed by Solon Beeman and landscaped by Nathan Barrett. 12,000 people lived there. By 1892, the property was valued at $5 million. It was stunning. It was also a gilded cage. Pullman owned everything, every house, every store, every square foot of sidewalk. Even the Greenstone Church was company property, rented out for religious services at a rate designed to earn Pullman his expected 6% return on investment. Professor Richard Ely wrote in 1885 that the power exercised by Bismarck was utterly insignificant when compared with the ruling authority of the Pullman Palace Car Company. Workers had everything but democracy. When economic depression hit in 1893, Pullman slashed wages but refused to lower rents. Workers struck. The American Railway Union joined in solidarity. It became one of the largest labor actions in American history. A national commission investigating the strike found that Pullman's paternalism was partly to blame and labeled it un-American. In 1898, the Illinois Supreme Court ordered the company to sell all non-industrial land. From the Yazoo swamps to Cairo's phantom skyline to Pullman's beautiful prison, a pattern emerges. As historian Edward Glaeser wrote, from the American Revolution onward, the country's lionization of entrepreneurial freedom has given aid and comfort to the perpetrators of duplicitous business schemes. And Dickens, back in the 1840s, diagnosed the underlying disease, a love of smart dealing, which gilds over many a swindle and enables many a knave to hold his head up with the best. Today, Pullman is a National Historic Park, Cairo is a ghost town, and Facebook, Amazon, and Google are all drawing up plans to build company towns of their own. The maps look beautiful, they always do.